Dan, welcome back to the show. How are we going to start this one? How you doing?
I don't know. I'm all right. First, not sure how to go about answering that question. How are you?
Yeah, I don't know either. I'm fine. You know what, Dan? I was thinking about this because as we are kind of speaking, Jeff Bezos has blasted off into space.
Has he really?
I think so. Yeah, I think. I got some kind of notification on my phone that was like Bezos in space or some bullshit like that. I have a bit of an unpopular take, I think, in that who's the guy who did it last week? The other billionaire.
Branson. Richard Branson.
This isn't a worrying trend. Branson. He's a prick. They're all pricks, obviously. They all suck. It's not like they're smart people. They've all exploited people to get their money. Duh, obviously. Having said that, I'll be honest, I was all ready to be really angry about the whole thing. And then I saw the video of like the plane dropping from the other plane, and it was pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah,
That's my unpopular take, is that it's pretty cool.
Okay.
It's really sick.
Yeah. I haven't actually watched that video yet.
It's cool.
It's the kind of thing that I try and avoid because I will get too into it.
Yeah.
You know? There is a whole subset of. I mean, there's a subset of YouTube videos devoted to every possible thing entirely, but I'm liable to stray into the kind of Elon Musk fanboyism portion of YouTube from time to time.
Oh God!
People who call Elon by his first name, one of is well up there with the most cringeworthy things that one could do.
It's because we're friends.
Exactly.
I would say something about a parasocial relationship, but except we love our listeners and we are your friends.
Yeah. It's difficult because it's I cannot imagine a person who I would find it more difficult to imagine having friends than Elon Musk.
No kidding. He's doing his best.
Yeah, I suppose he's trying.
He's trying. The photos of him coming out recently, he's taken a bit of a Trump turn, just in his general body shape and demeanor. It's unnerving. It's very unnerving. I don't know what the deal is.
He's
morphing into Trump. So I don't know. I don't know how Bezos is getting into space if he was using a rocket, but if he's using a plane, the plane one's cool.
Presumably a rocket. The space plane thing is cool.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it actually, there is some debate as to where space starts and whether this plane actually gets to space. But it looks pretty cool. It looks pretty cool. And also it's it looks very cool dropping off the small plane, dropping off the big plane and shooting up into space. And also it's just kind of it's very sci-fi.
Oh, exactly.
This is the thing that's most difficult to decide whether I'm okay with is how clearly these people are inspired by sci-fi.
Yeah.
And
shitty sci-fi.
Yeah.
Cringe sci-fi.
Maybe.
Elon's favorite books are the Heinlein books, the libertarian books.
Oh, right, yeah. Starship Troopers. And...
Yeah. The one about the moon. It's just ugh.
Okay,
we blame pop culture.
I wasn't thinking about fiction writing so much as TV shows. Right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
There's something very Expanse-esque about that that Virgin rocket or Virgin space plane or whatever it is. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, what's the end goal? Is it just to do space tourism, or is it to take over the process of bringing things to space, privatize it? I mean, that's already happened, but what's the Bezos?
What is the goal?
Yeah, it's a little sus.
I don't know whether it isn't just monopolize a thing and then work out what you're going to do with it afterwards. Whether it's, I guess the immediate term is
the market works.
I guess the immediate term is for fulfilling contracts with NASA or with other space agencies or putting up satellites.
Sure. Oh, sure. Yeah.
And then I guess some of them have ancillary or supplementary ideas for how they're going to make profit from these things.
Yeah.
Thinking of Elon Musk Starlink.
Yeah.
Supplying internet to people through
the moon,
through the satellites. And I guess the eventual goal may well be some amount of asteroid mining, although they don't seem to be. There are companies that are specializing in asteroid mining in a way that those big three, I suppose, if Virgin Galactic could count as one of the bigger The
big players. It's definitely the smallest, I feel like, the like weakest. Coolest plane, though.
Yeah.
Isn't there much asteroid mining? Does that make sense at all? Because it sounds cool, but it's also like how many resources are you using to get to the asteroid, and then what are you bringing back? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Somebody ask Aaron Bastani, I suppose.
Come on the pod.
Yeah.
Don't listen to our Tom episode.
I don't know. I guess I guess I'm willing to assert that it's plausible in the medium to long term.
Yeah, why not?
And I guess it's the kind of thing you probably want to monopolize.
I'd imagine.
Yeah. I mean, everybody wants to monopolize. Yeah. Well, I mean, the parasite cast of space capitalists.
You almost had your Elon phase show. Yeah. Everyone wants to monopolize on asteroid mining. Elon's just doing the best job.
Yep. You would if you could, folks.
Yeah, you would if you could. You lazy bastards. Speaking of actual useful things, Dan, how many goddamn potatoes did we dig up this week? Am I right?
It's quite a lot of potatoes.
Quite a lot.
Of potatoes.
Too many, even. Potato update. There was blight at the allotment. Everybody's got blight. I was walking around today. It's just like all the tomatoes are dying. All the potatoes have died. And I was talking with someone there today, and they were just like, yeah, that's why you don't grow outdoor tomatoes at an allotment, and you don't grow potatoes at the allotment unless they're like first early, second earlies, because one person's going to get blight, and it's just going to spread.
Yeah, I've only realized through this experience that it seems to be kind of a truism that it'll just happen.
Yeah.
You don't grow main crop.
Yeah, don't grow main crop. Grow first early, second earlies. We're just do what we did. Grow main crop. But then as soon as you see signs of blight, panic and dig them all out.
It's worked out fine anyway.
Yeah.
It's worked out fine.
A lot of potatoes curing upstairs. A lot of potatoes.
Yeah.
I've only had them drying for a couple days or curing or whatever, and I think they're fine. I looked it up and it was like 2 weeks, but I'm impatient to store them, I guess. They're just everywhere. They're on every surface, and it's just like, I want to be done with this. What are you going to do? So that's your potato update.
This is the life you've chosen for yourself, Jack.
Yeah. I wake up and potatoes just all over me. Yeah.
Nice. I ate all of my broad beans and then put the plants in the compost. So that cycle has ended, I suppose.
Yeah, I ate my last broad beans today for lunch. It was very good. Although, yeah, they were a little mealy. They were a little like...
got a bit chewy.
Yeah.
This is the problem. You really need to just harvest things in one go. And
Yeah. I just wasn't paying attention. Because by the time I noticed that there were actual beans on the broad bean, it was like, oh, now you only have a couple weeks. So there's your broad bean update.
Yeah.
Last one.
The last one until we get to September and we plant some more.
Exactly. I'll be like, what am I going to do? Yeah. Oh, my God, yeah. Yeah, I was trying to figure out what to plant and where the potatoes were.
I don't know.
I have no idea. I looked it up, and it was just like, this stuff I don't really want. So, I don't know. Might just leave it. Mix with some compost, leave it for next week or a year, whatever. All right. Let's get into it, I guess. Dan, what did we... Returning author, Hal Draper.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What was it called? The concept of the
dictatorship
of the proletariat in Marx and Engels.
In Marx and Engels.
Yeah. We started this run of 10 or 9 podcast episodes with the Hal Draper essay, and we've, I suppose, ended on one.
Yeah.
We promise we will try and diversify our podcast output.
Yes, we'll now be reading anarchists.
We've done quite a lot of heavy Marxian Marxology, I suppose.
Marxian Marxology.
Lots of economics and lots of Marxist theory, and we are continuing today, I suppose.
Yes, if you don't like it.
Partly motivated by the reference to the dictatorship of the proletariat in the reading that we did last week when we were talking about our final section of the fundamental principles of communist production and distribution. Partly because it's a term that crops up a lot of the time and we're not particularly familiar with. Partly because we needed something to read. Yeah. And it was relatively short.
Google essay.
Yeah.
Dictatorship of Proletariat. No more than 10 pages.
But it was not a disappointment.
No, absolutely
not. It was not a disappointment. Once again, Hal Draper, an excellent writer and a seemingly, I mean, we don't have very much to go on, seemingly an excellent Marx scholar.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's a term that gets bandied about a lot, the dictatorship of the proletariat. And it's also a term that seems to mean everything, but also just nothing. Like it means nothing to so many people. And it's something that I've noticed that a lot of people who have been like maybe almost wooed by Marxism, whatever that means, or like socialism, have come across it and then have just fallen for the bullshit about like, well, I don't know, man, that sounds like fascism to me, because it has the word dictatorship in it. So it means fascism at the same time.
It's unfortunate that there have been and continue to be several / many over history in scare quotes Marxist regimes that
yes
were, I think, inarguably various forms of dictatorship, as you would describe them in modern parlance or the modern interpretation of what that word means.
Yeah,
a huge amount of this essay is devoted to putting that word into its historical context and tell us what it meant or what it didn't mean or its general lack of meaning. But yes, I guess in a modern contemporary context, dictatorship isn't a particularly it's a bit of a bugaboo, isn't it? And not something that one would like to have to openly advocate for.
Yeah.
In the pub.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I don't know. Maybe we phrase this by saying like we're gonna talk about like. At least I'll say why I think Marx was right to use that phrase and why I understand what he means and why I think it's a good thing and it's cool and it's fun and it's great. But don't go around to your friends trying to introduce them, the people that you work with, and start off with the dictatorship of the proletariat. Maybe eschew that phrase altogether. So I mean, I don't know what purpose this episode is going to have beyond just I think like elucidating theory maybe of a transition and the like vocabulary that goes along with it. But that is to basically just say you can explain this whole essay to people and they'll still be like, you sound like a nerd. You're walking around talking about like, no, because like the dictatorship, it doesn't mean that. Like,
I think there is, maybe we'll come on to this, maybe we won't. I think there is a degree to which reading this essay does elaborate some general political theory questions, considerations
100%.
that are worth incorporating into our present thinking. And also, there's a certain amount of sort of strategic thinking as well, which is just what best language to use in what circumstances and how to propagate ideas, I suppose.
Yeah, no, totally. Just in the story of the phrase.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, if there's a general, if this essay comes down in a particular place, it's that the phrase "dictatorship of the proletariat" isn't particularly important to a full and fundamental understanding of Marxism, and one could quite easily describe a Marxist politics or a communist politics without reference to dictatorship or the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Yeah.
Hal Draper's conjecture is that it has no particularly specific meaning for Marx and Engels.
Yeah. I mean, you could just see that in the like years and years and years in which that phrase never came up in their writing at all.
Yeah.
And then they would mention it once to kind of like be like, okay, here's kind of what we meant. Or it's like, because everybody, rightfully so, reads a critique of the Gotha program. And that's like one of the bits that stands out like a bit of a sore thumb. If you don't really understand what he's saying, it's like they'll mention it then and then not talk about it at all. Then Louis Blanc will goddamn show up again. And they're going to have to be like, all right, here we are. Let's talk about this again. And they get confused on Louis Blanc and Auguste Blanqui.
I'm confused on Louis Blanc.
I just got it wrong. I just got it wrong. God damn it. I meant Auguste Blanqui. God damn it. But yeah, suffice it to say that you're absolutely right. Like, you don't have to pull on this string and kind of like confuse things by using this phrase. But I don't know. I think it's important to understand what it actually means because otherwise you're just going to get people confusing it.
Yeah, and someone might confront you with it one day.
yeah, exactly. What do you think about that? I guess just getting into it, it's interesting to see kind of like where Draper starts with, and he basically starts with like the etymology of the word dictator, because like at the time Marx and Engels were writing meant again kind of everything and nothing, but like now post World War II, obviously it has a much more hardened meaning, the phrase dictator, dictatorship, and so he brings it all the way back to like ancient Rome, right? Which like again, I kind of roll my eyes whenever anybody talks about that, but he makes the really good point in that like it was an actual like it was an office, wasn't elected or anything, obviously, but like it was a constitutional office for like the god dang, Carthaginians or the Samnites or whoever they're gosh dang invading again. We need someone to just deal with everything and not worry about the like bureaucratic, like, are we following the letter of the law? We'll just give power to this guy unconditionally for like X amount of time. They'll deal with the problem and it'll go away. And then that was the dictator. And now we have, a republic again. Everything's fair. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting just to see that that's where the phrase begins. That's where the phrase kind of comes from, is that it isn't just, like a Mussolini or somebody like that. Again, in a lot of periods of Roman history, you would see people act like that and act in a very, they'd be a dictator and then just not give power back. And so it didn't exactly work. But I think his point isn't that. His point is just that, look at this. It means something different than you think. Yeah. So you're wrong.
Yeah, he says that it means this very specific thing up until Caesar, and then he kind of like puts a kibosh on the whole thing.
Which is fake news. It was up until Sulla, but we can talk about that later.
After the podcast.
After the podcast, Jack. Not now.
Yeah. I'd be inclined to say that it was something very central to the Roman Republic's political constitution. It fulfilled a very specific function. Maybe it was even like central to maintaining its political regime, but perhaps even also its like mode of production in some respects as well. Sure. I don't know. But yeah, it's basically a state of exception, right? It's when we have to step outside of maybe some particular legal bounds, but the power that's gifted to somebody as a dictator is time limited, and also what they're able to do with it is politically constrained, kind of thing. They're not allowed to write certain. They're not allowed to like rewrite laws, or they're not allowed to, decree certain things or change certain constitutional aspects or what have you. It's just for crisis times, and in some respects, it's basically a conservative gesture, right? It's
sure.
How do we maintain the status quo?
Exactly.
How do we avoid
100%.
Things changing too much?
Yeah. They weren't giving it to like a tribune.
No.
Being like, fix things. No. Yeah. And then I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's all very interesting, but it is basically just, I think Draper, again, is just kind of using it as like an etymological tool of being like, this word hasn't always had its modern connotation of the like, the dictator. And I mean, like we even have to look like during World War II period, like this came up when they were talking about McNamara or somebody, but it's like, Hitler was a dictator, but also like FDR was a dictator, you know what I mean? By like many people in certain classes. So again, even now it means many different things, but we're still stuck in this limbo of like, it means everything and nothing. So then I think basically Draper just kind of like skips forward, right? Where he goes on to talk. He talks, God damn it. He talks about Louis Blanc, and he also talks about Auguste Blanqui. I know. I'm fine with just talking about Auguste Blanqui, so we don't fuck it up. Louis Blanc, short king. We can say that.
Okay.
Has been said on
which
the show
is the
before.
one he several times describes as like a pinko social democrat.
That's Louis Blanc.
That's Louis Blanc, and he's operating primarily in the February Revolution in 1848 or whatever.
Yeah.
Auguste Blanqui. French Revolution.
Not the French
aftermath, but the aftermath of.
So he was the guy we talked about this before. Where did the
Blancists come from?
He was the guy we talked about this before as like.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah, but I fuck it up because I know that like he was the guy who could have helped save things during the Commune, but he was either in prison or they just told him to fuck off. But it's also like this makes it seem like the Commune and him that would have been completely incompatible. So like maybe not.
Yeah. So Auguste Blanqui is the guy that basically just like continues to pop up. Yes. Whenever there's anything going down, he's just somewhere relatively nearby, or like there at least needs to be a footnote in every moment in history to tell us what Auguste Blanqui is up to, because he's still around up to something.
Yeah. And Louis Blanc had his moment in the sun. He was like we're gonna do the like give everybody a job thing, right to work kind of thing, and then it was sabotaged. And I think after that, everyone was like, all right, whatever. Because I think even socialists kind of turned on him as being like, look, you fucked this up. But he was like, I didn't screw it up. Like these other liberals screwed it up.
Sounds a bit wet to me.
Bit wet?
A bit wet.
Interesting.
a bit of a like damp,
pants.
bit of a damp squib. But
Damp
not
squib. Like a wet blanket.
bit of a wet blanket.
All right.
Yeah.
What's a squib?
I don't
Okay. Okay, so let's just from now on we're only talking about Auguste Blanqui. So if we fuck it up, we meant Blanqui. So this is a thing I didn't know anything really about at all. I knew obviously that like Blanquism, which to sum it up quickly, I'm sure someone will, not enjoy me saying this. Putschism, basically. It's like a nice form of like secret.
Are there any like Blanquists still out there in the world who are going to contest
Listen,
this?
I don't want to get on the wrong side of the Blanquists, all right? They're operating in secret now. They're met with the Bakuninists.
All of the Blanquists just became the Bakuninists.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Man, Bakunin does not come across
once
well.
again be in a position to offend the anarchists.
Yes, I know. I was thinking about that because we're going to have to slag at least that vein of anarchism on this episode. And I was like, how we've been doing
Well,
so
it's the
much
same
of that.
vein as anarchism that was slagged off in the first Hal Draper
Yeah,
essay that we read.
We've read a chapter of Bookchin's book, all right? That's kind of anarchism stolen valor, but we're not trying to be assholes. You're just liberals, and in this you come across as fascists. Okay, so Blanqui, Putschism, goes on definitely to inspire, if not the person, then the actions of one Lenin and Leninism, and just the general kind of concept of like, it gets adapted into more of like a party that kind of like acts on its own, a centralized party that kind of like brings, like the working class into power, quote unquote. But back then, Blanqui was basically just like, just have it be some boys, just like the lads getting together and like doing
it's
a
like
revolution.
the original sect, right?
Exactly.
And they're basically just the sort of elitist conspiracy that we sort of heard about in the first Hal Draper reading we did on socialism from above, socialism from below.
Yeah.
They're just, the boys, as you say, they're going to take over. And they're going to sort things out.
They're going to do socialism.
Yeah, they're going to do socialism.
It's a lot cooler than
whether we like it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
We're getting socialism.
It's a lot cooler than like, was it Robert Owen who we read about in the? It's a lot cooler than a lot of the like British socialists who are maybe sects, because it's like this is just like
the French to come across as like cooler.
Yeah. Ugh. It's like this is like an adventure.
That's secretly why I resent the French, because they're just cooler.
I don't know. We'll have that conversation later.
Okay.
But yeah, Blanquism is a lot. This is my personal opinion. A lot more fun. So it's just like adventurism, and I think at one point it gets called adventurism in this because it's like. Like, Bakunin would pop around and be like, now he's in like Lyon or something trying to set up a commune. And then like now he's like in Germany trying to do this. It was just the guys trying to do a revolution, and like, I don't see how it would ever have worked out. It's fun. Good for you. But like, I don't know.
People who Marx and Engels would accuse of wanting to set themselves up as various forms of dictators. Yeah. Their own personal revolutionary fiefdoms, or like Proudhon is perhaps the worst example of this.
Oh, Proudhon.
But all these people who fancied themselves kings of some sort or other.
Yeah, and you really just see a lack of any kind of like theoretical aspect to this kind of thinking, right? Because it's just like, we'll just get into power, we'll use the state that exists, but we'll turn it into like a dictatorship in kind of like the way that we think about it now, as like just me and the five guys doing socialism. And it's like, well, what are the imperative structures? What are you doing beyond just forcing people to act? And it's funny, right? Because like you see how so many of these people are just inspired by their interpretation of the actual like big French Revolution, right? But it's like, I don't know, if you're Blanqui, it's like, how is that what you're coming away from the French Revolution as? Where it's like these wars that like the Jacobins and like the actual revolutionaries wound up starting within France, to say nothing of like the actual wars, like, to go on like Napoleon between like the different countries and stuff. But like the wars in the Vendée, and then like all of the different wars with the peasants, where like all of these people died just by trying to do socialism to them. It's like, maybe not socialism, but like trying to change, the structure, and like, I guess, maybe go from like a monarchy to like a different mode of production or whatever. But like, still, how is that what you're coming away with? Like, this is a good idea. Let's do it again. Let's just be neo-Jacobins.
Yeah. There are quite a lot of references in this to the dictatorship of Paris. The idea that like Paris was just going to have to go and like sort out the provinces, kind of thing.
I'm shaking my head.
Yeah.
It's like we've talked about getting rid of London. Paris is also on the list.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's also on the list.
Yeah, I mean, if there is a modern day dictatorship, like London does dictate
Oh yeah,
to this country.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's the same thing in California. It's like there's Los Angeles and there's San Francisco and there are a couple other bigger cities that are kind of just swallowed up by those two cities. But it's like anything 20 miles east of the coast, it's like your water is being stolen and your lives are being dictated by the people consuming the things that you create. Cities, folks.
Who'd have them?
Yeah, who'd have them? All right, so maybe we should talk about then not the bad way of using the word dictatorship. Like, a point that gets made in this essay is that I forget exactly who makes it, but it's like Draper kind of makes a point where it's like, okay, you don't want a class dictatorship, because that's kind of the distinction to be made, right? It's like, do you want a dictatorship to bring on socialism of like Blanqui and his two dudes or whatever, or do you want like what Marx was saying, which is an actual like class dictatorship? Like you need the class to actually be running things and dictating. Obviously, it's like the working class dictating to what would have been the ruling class. And so like the distinction that gets made is like, again, between a class dictatorship and like a several person or like a party dictatorship or something like that. And a point that gets made is like, what do you think you're currently living under right now? If not a class dictatorship where one class is dictating everything to like the working class, to the majority of the people, to like, implement its will and to suck off all the surplus value and whatnot. And I thought that was really useful, just in terms of like, I don't know, the pretend debates I have with people in my head whenever anyone would actually want to talk about this stuff, where it's like, you're confronted on the phrase dictatorship. It's like, well, what do you think you're living under right now? It is obviously a class dictatorship, and the one that we would hopefully want to bring about would be one where things are being made better for everybody. And you're gonna probably have to force that a little bit, because it's the most powerful people aren't just gonna be like, all right, whatever. So yeah, that was a distinction that I thought was very useful. And it was interesting. There was at one point where Draper talks about like some Spanish conservative kind of asshole, and giving a speech. I don't know anything about this history, but giving a speech where like an actual dictator had just taken power in Spain, and this guy got up and was like defending him, and he was like, well, it's either going to be a dictatorship. It's so funny too, because he uses the phrase a dictatorship from above or a dictatorship from below. Mm-hmm. He's like, God damn it, give me the dictatorship from above.
The dictatorship of the saber or dictatorship of the dagger, and I choose the saber because it's nobler.
Oh God, that's cringe. No sabers in a socialist society. But it's funny too, because then like he talks about is it British Parliament as being like a dictatorship, because it just does whatever the fuck it wants.
This is one of the portions that was most interesting to me. If you like, I mean, you could just use you could use different words in a modern context, or you could use the word dictatorship if you wanted to. But if you liberate the word dictatorship from representing a very specific type of political regime, and just say anybody who is endowed with a particular degree
hegemony
of power, a degree of hegemony of decision making, anybody which is seen to be sovereign in the decision making process, kind of thing. I mean, they're talking about the reference is made to the British Parliament in the 19th century, and that nobody would have balked at describing it as a dictatorship. But I mean, even now, you like the way that the British Parliament functions in the British political system is that it is sovereign and basically has no checks upon it. Whatever it votes to do, it can do. We don't even have a constitution in this country, right? It's not even like, it's vaguely checked by our constitutional court, I suppose, now that we have one. But we don't really have a constitution, so it's not a constitutional court; it's a Supreme Court. But like, and I guess it's vaguely checked in some respects by the House of Lords, although in a lot of ways, like the House of Lords is a check upon the sovereignty of the people, kind of thing. So it's interesting to look at, like, I guess what's interesting about this terminology or this description of this political history is that it opens us up to the possibility of dissecting our present political circumstance in a different way. You can sort of like look at the ways in which Parliament in the UK contemporarily, this sovereign body, how does it get its like majority? Like, I would say under these circumstances, Boris Johnson is a dictator, right? Like, he has an 80-seat majority in Parliament. We have no constitutional check upon him. He can basically do whatever the hell he wants, supplemented by the sort of like grotesquely sycophantic and or otherwise heavily cowed media that we have in this country. Like there is no check upon his power, and he can just do whatever the hell he wants and be a catastrophic leader and get away with it, kind of thing. How would you not want to legitimately describe that as dictatorship, right?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Absolutely. And it is interesting to the extent to which that like Marx and Engels had to use that phraseology basically to like I don't know, it's almost like they're playing like vocabulary chess a little bit with like the Blanquists, and that they're, because again, we said that there were so many points where they just gave up on the phrase dictatorship of the proletariat, or not gave up on, but just didn't talk about it because it wasn't exactly central to what they were talking about. But like,
because it has no specific content separate from any other piece of terminology.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know, where is I going with that?
Sorry,
I guess no, it's fine. It's just, I guess like the point is just like it basically just served a different point, which was to enlighten people, I suppose, as to like this idea that they had that they might not have otherwise described as a dictatorship were it not for, maybe for the Blanquists. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but like, I don't know. It was a way to kind of like use the phraseology that had been adopted by the Blanquists as they were kind of trying to like, you know, make putschism the thing, baby. To kind of like, you know, cow them into like, oh no, well, like here's what we actually mean, and here's how, you know, we have like incentive structures perhaps built into place to make sure that the working class keeps power, and that it isn't just like some dude running around or like one party running around running everything. Yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. So we should actually talk about what Marx and Engels meant.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like, I guess there's a point to be made that when the Blanquists, or when the word dictatorship might have been used to describe their political agenda. I mean, we've already talked about what their political agenda was, right? It's quite legitimate in that context to consider the use of the word dictatorship to mean what we might contemporaneously mean by dictatorship, right?
Yeah.
Like they wanted to install a special body of person who was going to dictate the process, kind of thing. But they make the point that like dictatorship didn't necessarily mean specifically that. It was just in that context, that's the way they were using the word dictatorship. Dictatorship, all it meant was the ability to dictate terms, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they make Hal Draper makes an interesting point that like at that time it could be seen as a similarly vague piece of terminology as government is, right? Dictatorships could be democratic or like putschist, I suppose, just as a government could be democratic, or it could be a monarchical government, or it could be an imperial government. But yeah, they make the interesting point. Hal Draper makes the interesting point that, and this is interesting coming back to like the idea of Marx and Engels, like using terminology. This piece of terminology is being used in very specific contexts to facilitate very specific debates, but also more importantly to more effectively propagandize ideas, right?
Yeah.
I suppose it's worth saying that for Marx and Engels, like the dictatorship of the proletariat is a piece of terminology that is almost synonymous with working class government or proletarian power or proletarian government, or like working class or proletarian sovereignty or class power. The reason why they start using this phrase dictatorship of the proletariat when they're talking about, basically whenever they come into contact with Blanquists regularly, whether it's after 1848 or in the aftermath of 1871 when there were lots of refugees from the Paris Commune who end up in London, kind of thing, Marx starts to use this term dictatorship of the proletariat because what he's trying to do is introduce or propagandize to people who might be fans of the Blanquist kind of like conception of dictatorship to say, no, it's not a dictatorship of a political elite. It's the dictatorship of the class as a whole.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's the dictatorship of the proletariat in its entirety.
It's almost like the emphasis has been swapped, where it's like instead of like now it's like the dictatorship of the proletariat. Then they're like, it's the dictatorship of the proletariat. Blanquists owned.
How Draper keeps focusing on and criticizing various kind of like Marxologists of his contemporary eras or of the 20th century kind of thing. And he keeps said Marxologists would, or a certain subset of them would note that Marx always used the phrase dictatorship of the proletariat in a discourse and dialogue with Blanchism. Blanchism? And said Marxologists was always take from that the fact that, oh, here we go, clear evidence that Marx was secretly a Blanquist putschist. And it's no wonder that Marxism ended up being what it became in the 20th century, because here it is, the seeds of it in Marx's own writing, is Marx's own hand kind of thing. What this notion or idea of putting the phrase dictatorship of the proletariat in its specific propagandistic context is to say, no, it's the opposite is true. It's not that Marx was a secret Blanquist, but like Marx wanted to subvert the ideas of the Blanquists and bring them closer to the light, I suppose, to a Marxist understanding, but like to the idea that Marxism, or rather the working class movement, when combined with socialism, ought result in a workers' movement which was deeply and fully democratic and majoritarian, and concerned fundamentally with building up political power, but also building and advocating for a political system in which the views and the desires of the proletarian mass could be most faithfully represented. Rather than having somebody have to dictate what socialism would be.
Exactly.
Socialism could well up from below.
Yeah. Well, and just in a practical sense, it's like, oh, how much better would it be if the class could sort out what is in the class' best interest, as opposed to someone being like, this? You know? Yeah, it's funny. You get a very interesting view. We were talking about this. You get a very interesting view of Marx as a person in this essay, of like someone who was like very concerned and would put in the work to like Draper kind of makes it seem like he put a lot of these Blanquists under his wing to like really convince them that, like,
it's a very like nurturing.
Yeah,
Marx,
it is.
isn't it? I was saying that I came away from it very sympathetic toward Marx, more than I had been before, kind of thing. And when we were talking about it off mic, I sort of settled on the idea that he comes across as very like morally virtuous, you know, like. Yeah. There are all these people in the working class movement trying to set themselves up as mini dictators, whether it's any number of Blanquis, or whether it's Ferdinand Lassalle, should we say, or he makes reference to the guy in Britain who was head of the Social Democratic Federation, Heinemann or whatever, like working class leaders who thought they were going to fucking Proudhon, working class leaders who thought they were going to set themselves up as the dictators of the post-revolutionary world kind of thing. And Marx was aghast at that idea. Yeah,
well, it's interesting too.
And it also, I guess, puts in context, Marx is like taking Marx to be a know-it-all, like seeing what it was that he was trying to rebuke and rebut. Like, you can kind of forgive him for coming across as a bit of a stuck in the mud kind of thing.
Yeah, seeing how things wound up. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because like, you get the like virtuous Marx from this, but you also get like a very like. It's fascinating in a sense of like a strategic sense, because it's like, wow, look at where a lot of these movements were, whether it was like, obviously it was dead by Erfurt, but like look at the Gotha program, or look at, obviously like all of these goddamn Blanquists coming from across the goddamn channel. And, he still just was like, this isn't going to work out well if we do that. And so even though there was all this energy, specifically I'm thinking of like the Gotha program itself, even though there was all this energy behind this like working class movement, he was still able to be like, guys, no, I'm not going to put my name on this. What the hell? Absolutely not. I think that's interesting in like a strategic sense. Maybe it was like more of just a know-it-all thing. But yeah, it's just very interesting. I don't know.
I guess as a reference, this chimes very heavily with this view of Marx that we've sort of tried to construct many episodes ago in terms of Marx in relationship to the auxiliary statement. Right? We have the Marx here who is committed to his fundamental laws, and there's also the Marx who is very deeply engaged in political context and very willing to move in certain directions, ready to read the world as it is, not the way he wants the political world to be, but at the same time is very specifically fixated on what the goal is.
Yeah.
And if we let certain corruptions into our theoretical thinking, it's really going to put us off track.
Yeah.
That's why there have to be all these corrections made to the Gotha program, which to some extent seem like pig-headed, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or it's exactly the same reason why Engels decides to get so heavily involved in the debates around the Earth program in the early 1890s.
Even though nobody wanted it to.
Yeah, nobody. Yeah.
They're like, stop.
But Engels, for the end of his life, seemed to be very much almost excommunicated from the German social democratic movements because of the degree of stink that he caused around the Erfurt program and around the efforts he made to get the critique of the Gotha program published, to reveal quite how critical Marx was of Ferdinand Lassalle, something that hadn't been known at the time, to have the audacity to demand that the party ought put in its political program a demand for the institution of a republic in Germany, God forbid.
Yeah.
And then after his death, Engels' sort of legacy is corrupted by those people who survive him, who suggest that he became much more reformist toward the end of his life, became much more committed to constitutional as opposed to anti-constitutional politics, by which I mean operating within rather than against the formal political structures of the German state, kind of thing. So it's quite nice to have Engels put in a context of being a radical and a revolutionary up till the end.
Yeah, there's that great moment at the end where this essay ends on Plekhanov coming to talk to Engels. I imagine Engels is like this tiny little old dude, and it's like a very dramatic passing of the torch that kind of gets fucked up. But it's just really interesting because like Engels asks him, like he's listening to him and he's hearing him talk about like, oh, so you're a Marxist. You're talking about social democracy, huh? What does that mean? And Engels asks him like, so what do you think the phrase dictatorship of the proletariat means? And he basically just says, something about the party and about like, basically like what Draper would probably be like is a little socialism-y from above. And Engels is just kind of like, that'll never work.
Yeah.
it's very chilling because
it suggested that like both Plekhanov and the person who is from whose memoirs that Draper is quoting, so it's somebody else who was in the room to witness this interaction, Draper seems to suggest that both of those two basically didn't understand what Engels was telling them.
Yeah, I know,
like they basically thought that Engels was au fait with their ideas and on side kind of thing, and actually Engels was just like being like, no, this is bullshit.
Yeah, well, that just speaks to like that mindset of like, oh, it's a class dictatorship. Yeah, exactly. We form a party and then the party does things. And it's interesting. It's right. Like it's interesting because in Fundamental Principles they make the point where they're like, yeah, you could have like a successful party dictatorship maybe, but like not if it gets stuck halfway. And for them, halfway means like not implementing social production time or whatever, like the socially average working hour as like the new unit of account.
But yeah, they're like, you can have dictatorship of the proletariat, or you can have dictatorship over the proletariat.
Yeah, for the proletariat. They're like, yes. I wonder what language they were speaking. Probably German. Yeah. It was just a mistranslation, I assume. But then anyway, Draper goes on to basically be like, yes, and from there you see the seeds of like, obviously, like the Mensheviks, and then just like the Russian social democracy movement in general. Possibly just through a misunderstanding.
It's quite, it's interesting that like, I don't know how much I agree with the idea that Lenin took the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat and corrupted it in a sort of Blanquist fashion. I mean, if you read like State and Revolution, you come away with the idea that he was very much like understood the Marxist interpretation of what that meant. I don't know whether you look at other parts of his canon or whether you look at the actual deeds that he did and come away with a different perspective. But it's interesting to see Draper set the narrative on a different footing by suggesting that this isn't an invention of Lenin's.
Exactly, yeah.
Lenin gets it from Plekhanov, and Plekhanov gets it from this misunderstanding in this interaction, I suppose.
Yeah, I like imagining that like Plekhanov's like, oh, all right, cool, so we agree with each other, and Engels is just like, it's like how many times have I had this goddamn conversation?
The wild dreaming revolutionary comes to
Yeah.
sort of kneel at the altar of
exactly.
Engels, and it's just like fucking these
great.
kids. God damn it.
Yeah, it's definitely worth, I think, talking about too. Just like the thing that Engels points to as being like, there it is, the dictatorship of the proletariat, and Marx as well, obviously. But talking about the Paris Commune, and it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about the Paris Commune since there was the chapter on the dictatorship of the proletariat in Fundamental Principles from last week. And they come up with a bit of an interesting analysis that Draper doesn't seem to, because like in the Draper, he basically says that like this is it, and you get the dictatorship of the proletariat by basically doing what they describe in the Fundamental Principles book of like universal suffrage and everybody's vote counting for like the same thing, but then also like making everybody in this government, this like new, obviously not the same state, but something that state is answerable to, recallable at any time, and like all of these various like democratic trappings. I don't know. It's very interesting because I think just in the Fundamental Principles book, they come away by basically just saying, but you probably couldn't do the Paris Commune now. Like that wouldn't be a very viable strategy to get things done, even though there's some great ideas in there and it's really, really fascinating. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's very interesting. I never really know what to make of the Paris Commune, and maybe it's just something that is able to be kind of held on a pedestal just because of how short of an amount of time it was around, and we can all say like, wow, that would have been great if they had done X, or wow, that would have been great if they had prepared for war or something like that. Maybe that's just needing to read more about it or something like that, but I don't know. Maybe I'll just take away the idea that like it is very funny that like universal suffrage, there it is, the dictatorship of the proletariat, we did it. Not implying that like we have universal suffrage or anything like that, but like it's classic.
Yeah, for my part, to drift back into the sort of like Marxology for a minute, like one of the things Draper says is that basically in Marx's immediate writings about the Paris Commune, he doesn't talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat at all. He just talks about how glorious a democratic experiment this is and how it's representative of what a worker state might look like, kind of thing, whether it is the ultimate expression of the politics he wishes to endorse. And then either later on that year or the next year or something, there is a banquet to celebrate an anniversary of the founding of the Third International, and he is asked to give this short speech, and the speech that he gives now, because London is now full of all these blanquists kind of thing, it's in that speech that he describes the Paris Commune as being representative of the dictatorship of the proletariat, after having celebrated its like sort of democratic credentials. And one of the things that's demonstrated there is that, like, once again, coming back to this idea that the word dictatorship didn't really mean very much in any specific context, kind of thing. And it means that Marx didn't mean anything specific by dictatorship. He could just as easily have talked about democracy.
Yeah.
And also later on, there's this reference made because, like, there is this very famous quote from Engels where Engels talks about what you just said. If you want to see the dictatorship of the proletariat, look at the Paris Commune. And there's always been this idea that there was this invention. Well, Draper suggests at the time when he was writing, or just immediately before it, there was this suggestion that this was an invention of Engels's, because people didn't know about this speech that Marx had given very close to the Paris Commune. Now it's known, kind of thing, that we can assert that both Marx and Engels thought that the Paris Commune was an example of the dictatorship of the proletariat, but you could just as easily describe it as a worker state, or like I don't know, proletarian democracy, or I don't know, an assertion of proletarian power, or
it's almost
class domination of the proletariat over the
I think something more like that, because it almost like, if you take it to just mean dictatorship, to just mean hegemony, it's like, oh, I don't know about that. It's like the other class was just like 5 miles away preparing an army, and then when they were ready, they came in and killed everybody.
Sure,
but like while the municipal functions of Paris did fall to these people, yes, there was like within the little city walls or whatever, like there was hegemony there. I don't think that really means anything other than that it didn't work. Yeah,
but the other thing it makes me think about is this, or these kind of these terminology or these ideas, how they impact or influence, or they might impact or influence our thinking about political strategy, political thinking, how politics is much more a game of political power than it is implementing the perfect scenario, or like the business of class struggle is a messy one, and the process of gaining hegemony is like complicated. But I guess the time will come where the power of it, ideally, if a working class revolution is to be achieved, if a transformation of the mode of production by the working class is to be undertaken, you've got to get to a point where power can be held so thoroughly that you're able to dictate terms.
Yeah.
And to set the agenda.
Yeah. Which, again, our reading from last week, simply and to the point, was just dictating one very specific thing, which is getting everybody to use the socially average working hour.
And also in that book they do refer to the idea that a certain amount of force and power may have to be implemented.
Well, yeah.
With a view to setting up the democratic system that would allow for their system to play out, I suppose. There is this thing that comes up several times, this idea that somebody has to take the legitimacy of a revolution, carry its mantle, and put in place the new political system that will allow for its completion, I suppose, that will fulfill the aims of the revolution. So there's definitely a period whereby sovereignty is contested, where legitimacy is contested, where it has to be claimed, and a kind of like being the legitimate representative of a popular sentiment has to be asserted and won, I suppose. This is almost brings us all the way back to the idea of a state of exception, right? You're in a momentary state of exception. It's sort of like there is some contingency around who's going to wield political power.
Sure.
I mean, in reference to Marx's views on the 1848 revolution, he's like, I don't mind that whoever it was, certain people were given dictatorial power. But the problem was, and his fundamental critique of the German bourgeoisie at the time was that they were not willing to implement the democratic structure that was so clearly what was being demanded by the revolution, kind of thing. And that was how, for Marx at that time, the dictators of that revolution failed in their effort to dictate the situation, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's also like, to a certain extent too, you can also just be like, again, this phrase means everything and nothing, because it's like, okay, you can have 5 people who accept that, a class dictatorship is what needs to happen, but it's like, okay, what does that mean? You know what I mean? So I guess that's perhaps why they pointed to the Paris Commune as well, as just being like, here's the thing, because like you could easily make the point, unlike a lot of things in history, where you could just be like, yes, this was directly responsible to the people. Here's why. Here's how they did that. Blah, 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 blah. That was a class acting on its own. Who knows what would have happened in a year or 2 years, 10 years, 100 years. But for that moment, there it is. There's a dictatorship with proletariat. So it's like, yeah, I suppose you can make an argument, as it seems like Plekhanov kind of in his like nodding along when Engels was like, you're wrong, made the point that like, yeah, the dictatorship of the class is what we're trying to do. And, you can completely forgive them for thinking that. And you understand, why some people would consider like a party dictatorship to also just be a class dictatorship. But it is like really trying to pin down and define what that actually means. And in a way that like, you can make it mean whatever you want.
Yeah. It's what we've talked about before in terms of substitutism, right? Like this is the party substitution. It's
exactly,
itself for the class kind of thing.
Yeah. Effing classes. Why is it so easily done now, Dan? Why is it so easily done now?
Why is what so easily done now?
A class dictatorship. Why is it so easily? Why is it?
Oh, I see what you mean. Why do they get away with it?
Like goddamn get away with it.
We live in a class dictatorship.
I want to be on the cool plane.
But don't you watch that? Don't you watch this space plane fall off the other plane and be like, is the rocket going to turn on though? Is the
it would be
rocket
hilarious
turn
if
on,
it didn't. And I will say, there's not a chance in hell. Actually, I would actually literally want to be on that plane. I would like anyone to have the opportunity to be on that plane. Me myself, I don't like buildings over like 3 stories. So
okay,
I'm all right.
Okay. Yeah.
We did bring up too right before this, like the theory of the emergence of capitalism that we've been bandying about ever since episode 3 and 4 or whatever it was.
A theory.
A theory. Well, yeah, the one we've been bandying about, like, and like how that relates to this idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, and like how you could easily see that transitional phase out of feudalism as being one of a dictatorship of a class as well, and one where, we're definitely still in, but like harsh terms needed to be provided for by that class in that specific time to make this new productive mode happen. Obviously, whether or not that was like on purpose for like a group of dudes to be like, let's do this new productive mode or not, or whether it was just like the imperatives of the growing market, the emerging market. It's interesting just to draw parallels because it wasn't easy. And you see to this day large and bloody struggles to continue it. And I don't really know what parallels are to be drawn from that, if any, other than a lot of work. And it's interesting to see people kind of act in these large historical cycles, I suppose, and perhaps draw parallels.
Yeah, something's just occurred to me that I hadn't thought about before, which is that if you look at the sort of like Meekson's Wood-Brenner thesis of the transition from feudalism to capitalism, there is an extent to which the ruling class of one initially becomes the ruling class of the other, right? It's like it's the same ruling class that decides to extract rent rather than collect feudal tithes or whatever, or feudal dues or something. I don't know, that sort of complicates more than it does help to some extent.
Certainly includes them.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. But there is I suppose there's a new class. Well, basically, yeah. What happens is like certain tenant farmers become agricultural capitalists as they outcompete other tenant farmers who then go out of business and become the new working class, the new sort of agricultural working class kind of thing. But what we were talking about beforehand was the degree to which, in that circumstance, it's so much of it is people are subject to the logic of the new economic model rather than, they're also subject to direct political power of the working class, but there's an extent to which it's being forced to operate within market logics and the new sort of like profiteering mindset of capitalism, which forces people to sort of go through this transition and come out the other side some form of capitalist subject, whether it's proletarian or capitalist. And there's parallels with that and the model that was being presented in the fundamental principles, right? When they're talking about the dictatorship is the requirement to operate with the model or be outside of it, kind of thing. So I guess there's always a degree to which the dictatorship is economic and not political, or there is a portion which is economic and a portion which is political, and how do the two intersect, and whether they should be kept separate or whether they should intersect,
or whether we have any control
whether we have any control over any of this stuff. Yeah.
Am I Blankius? No. I will say it was also very funny, the bits where Bakunin got brought up as just being like, what was this guy on? Like, he was on his own thing. He was like, Blankiism, let me raise you a bit, baby. It's like, oh my God. What about a secret little cohort?
Yeah. And the anarchists love to quote that thing from Bakunin about his assertion that Marxism was going to lead to some kind of red dictatorship or whatever the phrase he used.
God.
But, may seem apt as time has developed under a certain reading of history, but in the context of what he was up to at the time and what Marx was up to at the time is not a particularly faithful critique. I don't know.
Well, there's also like well, Bakunin was on the front lines, like actually fighting people. What was Marx doing? He was like hanging out with penis carbuncles, you know what I mean? But it's also like, it's a bit of adventurism. Yeah, it's cool, hey, great, awesome. I probably wouldn't do that.
I'd rather watch the Bakunin biopic than the Marx biopic.
Yeah,
but
absolutely. Someone's got to make that.
Yeah, one day.
Biopic.
Yeah, I implore you to go and just like read Bakunin's biography, or at least his Wikipedia page, and just see his exploits and the degree to which he the number of times he escaped death and the circumstances that led him to circumnavigate the globe in an effort to escape the recriminations of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah, the number of times seemingly all his teeth fell out. His teeth fell out in a Russian prison. Then he went to California and his teeth fell out. Then he went around the horn and his teeth fell out again. And then he showed up on someone's doorstep, teeth in his hands, and threw them at him. Yeah, interesting fellow. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. What was the point in talking about that? I guess it's funny, right? Because I was very interested when you brought this up to like expand on the discussion that was in the fundamental principles. But this which this definitely did, and it definitely like cleared Marx's and Engels's meaning when they use this phrase a lot. But it's also like, yeah, this is just, whenever someone's like, you're going to do a dictatorship with communism. This is like a really good way to be like, and I guess that was Draper's whole point when he kind of tied it up with Russian social democracy, because everyone obviously in his time and still ours is like communism, Soviet Union, look at that. And this was like his way of kind of drawing a thread between an argument Marx was having and trying to argue against, and what wound up happening with the Soviet Union, which is interesting, and just socialism in general in the 20th century. Yeah, stuff.
Yeah, I think for me there's a great benefit in reading this alongside the first Hal Draper reading that we did on Socialism from Above, Socialism from Below. It's a different way of looking at, or a different collection of evidence to support the idea that Marx supported socialism as something that was fundamentally done by the working class, not done to them.
Yeah.
But there's still a great degree of, I think we were talking about this beforehand, maybe we could end on it, like, because I don't know whether we have any answers. There's still a great degree of ambiguity for me about what Marx actually meant by, I don't know, a worker state or, like, okay, the Paris Commune, yeah, but as you were saying, it was a month and it didn't go particularly well by the end, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But maybe in a lot of ways, like, the fundamental principles fills in some of that space. But then maybe, I don't know, does that mean we have to be council communists?
I mean, it fills in like a bit of the space towards the end of the timeline. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the end of the timeline because you're not just describing what communism is. It's another step in like, how do you get to full communism? But it's like, okay, well, there's also where we are now and when you can be in the position to do social, like, average working hour unit.
Yeah, we still don't really have the politics, right?
Yeah.
And we don't have the roadmap to how that politics is before. But then politics is an open and ongoing thing, I suppose. Yeah. So, like, that is the stuff that's supposed to be filled in. And clearly, I think Marx and Engels thought it would be filled in by history. And I suppose history has let us down thus far.
God damn it, history. Ugh. Also, like, to be fair, though, I was also like, for some reason, just in my head, I was like, man, they're talking about this 200 years ago. And this isn't a big difference, but I was like, oh, it's only like 150 years ago. Because, you like to think that it's like this big slog from Marx where nothing has happened. There were failures and great triumphs and then more failures, and it's all sucked. And now we've gotten to this point where it's like, is there even a point in trying to do this stuff anymore? But it's like, that's not that long ago. It's really not that long ago at all. A lot has changed, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, man.
I mean, if you consider it in the context of like the entire history of the human species on this planet.
But even like your great grandfather, you know what I mean? It's like, it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is an extent to which these things are still being worked out. The bourgeois revolution is still working itself out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you have to look at this fucking country to see the degree to which the bourgeois revolution has not worked itself out.
Yeah.
I doubt that it ever will, really.
One of these days...
we might have to have the proletarian revolution fulfill the failings of the bourgeois revolution. The bourgeoisie have failed in their world historic duty of ridding us of aristocratic landlords and...
One of these days, I'd like to really nail down what the queen actually can do. Because you seem to get two different answers where it's like she does nothing, she just sits there. And then it's like, oh, she could do this if she wanted. So I don't know, I'd like to know.
The queen has sovereignty, and she gives it to Parliament in its entirety.
Yeah,
and Parliament gives it to Boris Johnson.
But if there ever
Boris
was
Johnson
a point,
is our great dictator.
Yeah, if there ever was a point, though, where someone would question that whole, giving of sovereignty or whatever, like... who in their right mind would side with the Queen, and who in their right mind would side with like the next guy? Because oh my God, I saw him. When England lost the football, they cut to him, and he just looked like such a loser. But I guess bigger losers have been sided with in the name of bourgeois democracy, I suppose. So I don't know. Who knows? Whatever. The Queen, she'll do socialism.
Godspeed to the Queen, I guess.
Godspeed to the Queen. God save the Queen. All right. That was 39. Look at that.
Yeah.
Episode 39. Pretty good.
Pretty good. I hope everybody's enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed doing it. Thank you, Jack.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Did we actually, it was 31, Hal Draper as well?
No.
Or something like that.
Yeah, maybe it was.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
We'll say that it was. How cool.
Yeah, why
wow,
not?
we've come full circle.
Yeah, bookended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
As I say, we'll try and start mixing it up a bit more.
Yeah.
I think going forward.
I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like what we're interested in. Like, because this was like, oh, let's talk more about the dictatorship of the proletariat. We ended on that in our last reading. Let's talk a bit more about it. So it's like mixing it up, but also like, yeah, it's a coherent train of thought.
Sure, yeah. And yeah,
like
I mean, the listener, should they choose to listen to more than one episode or several in succession, like, is on a journey with us.
Yeah.
Like, we're just educating ourselves and trying to work it out, and hopefully somebody gets some benefit from it somewhere out there.
Yeah.
I mean, let us know.
Yeah. If you have any suggestions too, by all means. By all means. Otherwise, we'll just wind up reading about the CIA. Yeah. All right. Well, that was great. We'll be back next week, of course. And it'll be excellent. And Jack, Dan, take us out.
Thanks everybody for listening. It's been a pleasure once again. You've been listening to Auxiliary Segments. Bye-bye.
The music you heard this episode was Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. If you like this song, you can check it out and much, much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. Be sure and follow us up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you like what you heard, be sure and tune in next week for some more commie discussion. Till next time.